Okay, so just to go back to this slide that I showed in the PDM webinar, this is really the core of how Windchill manages data. It uses this object-based digital data model. Okay, so the idea is that we have objects that we need to manage. Okay, so those objects could have a multi-level product structure. Okay, attached to that object. So essentially, that's really our BOM, as you can see there. That object can have a CAD associated to it that helps describe it. It could also have derived content that comes from that CAD, like step files or PDFs or whatever it might be. There'll be history of that with versions, A1, A2, B1, B2, and so on. There'll be a whole bunch of metadata properties and attributes, things like its number, its name, who created it, when it was last modified. It will be lifecycle managed, okay, which helps us control things like is it in work, is it released? So we can see that, which also helps us control access to that as well, which we touched on a little bit in the PDM webinar. We might have information for that part if we're going to manufacturing. Externally, might have approved manufacturers and vendor lists for external parts. We will have documents that help describe that. They might be controlled or uncontrolled documents that are used to describe that. And then we want to do a whole bunch of stuff with that thing or with that object, like search for it, link it, lifecycle manage it, integrate that to external systems, which we'll touch on a little bit today. Maybe perform things like dashboards for analytics and analysis on that as well. Okay, and really that's the idea of how Windchill manages the data inside it. So to sort of put that in, I guess, in more terms around what you sort of tend to see in the UI for Windchill. So again, we did discuss this in the PDM webinar, but it's worth touching on again today. So when we store content in Windchill, we store that as documents. Okay, so they could be CAD documents, like you can see here on the screen. We've got a Creo CAD assembly structure, and each of those could have a related drawing. It could be SolidWorks, Inventor. Windchill is multi-CAD, as we've discussed in the past. We've got our version control in there. So we've basically got that CAD data. So if you're doing just pure PDM in Windchill, you could check that CAD assembly into Windchill and have all of your management in there. Okay, but with Windchill, apart from CAD documents and other documents, we can also choose to create what we call parts. Okay, I might call them WT parts in today's presentation to help differentiate them from a CAD or Creo part. So when we check in that CAD structure, we can create an equivalent part structure. So these parts, the gear icon that you see in the Windchill UI by default, they are essentially a representation of the business object. So they are the container for information that we saw in the last slide. So this part has an associated CAD assembly that helps describe it, as well as a drawing that's related to that. And that structure, that structure can come from CAD. So as we check this CAD model in, we can build that structure. Okay, so there's that relationship there between them. So that's essentially we could say that's our CAD BOM. Okay, so what we could do with those parts is maybe we've got some other documents like a manual that we can put into Windchill. So this is our controlled and uncontrolled documents. We can now relate that document to that part. Okay, so the idea is we go to that part and now we can start to see more bits of information that help describe that object. So we've got the CAD assembly, we've got the CAD drawing, and now we've also got a part manual. And we could have 20, 30 other documents attached to this, all kinds of information, spec sheets, test reports, whatever that might be. Okay, and as we discussed in the PDM, where really that's the beauty of putting not just your CAD but your documentation into Windchill, because then as you are building things like historical baselines for configuration control, then all of that information is there. You don't have your CAD in one system and your documentation in another system. Okay, so that's really just the CAD BOM, but really today's webinar is really on focusing on these BOMs, what we can do with this stuff. Okay, so your CAD structure that you build typically is not the complete product structure. That's not actually what you ship out the door. Okay, there's a whole lot more that goes into it than this that isn't necessarily described in CAD, and often you don't want to describe it in CAD. So in our golf cart example, we make and sell golf carts, and maybe within the organization we've got another department that does the bags. Okay, so they use AutoCAD for just drawing up what the bag's going to look like to send that off to get made. So what we can do is we can also use Windchill for managing that AutoCAD drawing, but also for that AutoCAD drawing, we can create a Windchill part, and we can actually go and add that into the golf cart structure. So now our Windchill structure, our BOM structure, is different to our Creo CAD structure. Okay, and we can continue to add more things into that. We might have some Loctite that's described by a data sheet, whatever that might be. So now we start to generate up more of an engineering BOM than just a basic CAD BOM. Okay, so that's really the idea of BOM management. Is Windchill is to create these WT parts and build that structure to give you that full definition. So there might be software parts that go in here, electrical information, whatever that might be. We can build up a more complete BOM. Okay. All right. So that's the idea of using Windchill. So to come back to that at a high level, right? One of the key capabilities of Windchill is this BOM management. Okay, so to create and manage that BOM, visualize the BOM as it's updated, because we've got the CAD, we've got visualization available, so we can see that. We can see the related information. We can understand all of the documentation that goes with it, and then we can start to evolve that BOM over time. Okay, we've got the ability to import and export those BOMs as well. A bunch of comparison tools that we can use that Imran is going to show us in the demonstration. So basically the ability to manage that BOM related and driven by CAD with all the associated documentation, but moving away from systems like Excel, which is really just a disconnected export out of the system, and doesn't really evolve over time like this does, because it's live and connected to the data. Okay, so once you've got that BOM, you might have an engineering BOM, but you might have something more complex than that. Okay, so here we might start to talk about product variability. Okay, so maybe you don't just produce a golf cart, maybe you've got a whole family of golf cart. Or when you offer a golf cart, you might have a whole bunch of options and variants that the customer can choose from. Okay, so what you then start to get into is things like an overloaded BOM, where you want to then choose which particular options are valid for this particular customer or this particular region, whatever it might be. Okay, so there can be different features. So you can define the rules for that and let the customer choose, or the sales configuration, whatever it might be. Okay, so you can start to build out a platform that gives you these reusable options to create something that's much more complex, but still linked into that data, still managed inside the one system. Okay, so this is quite common. You don't just produce one thing. You might have it. It's in the snowmobile example. It's part of a family of products, and we need to manage all of that. Okay, and that can get very complex over time, but Windchill gives us the tools to manage that.